beyond the thunder and lightning, past the clouds, over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star. Opened the earth, walking with blood-soaked feet. She challenged the whip, the gun, the knife. She challenged the fire, pulled from the bodies of
Well, greetings and welcome back as always. Thank you all so much for joining me today. You know, this past Wednesday, Venezuelan President Maduro responded forcefully to Donald Trump's veiled declaration of war. It appears as though Maduro is not capitulating, calling Trump's bluff rhetorically and operationally. Where does this go from here? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. With each show, my guests and I provide insight and analysis into current events and the broader historical context in which most of these events take place. Usually at this point of the program, I quickly look at some of today's headlines, but today I want to make this point, and I'm asking my guests for a few moments of indulgence here. Wednesday evening, as I mentioned yesterday, I sat through Trump's address to the American people. I endured the entire painful, putrid, disconcerting, nauseating 18-minute diatribe of lies, lies, and more lies, a cacophony of lies. So I've had a day or so to reflect upon what I saw and what I heard. And I've also had the chance to listen to, read, and digest some of the analysis of or response to it. We know what it tells us about Trump. He's a very sick man. But what does this tell us about the system? A number of mental health experts have publicly suggested that Donald Trump exhibits traits consistent with certain conditions, such as narcissistic personality disorder, malignant narcissism, and antisocial personality disorder. He did not receive the Nobel Prize for Peace. So what does he do? He persuades or extorts FIFA to create and award him a so-called peace prize, a manufactured prize. And it's reported the White House asked FIFA to make the trophy as big as the World Cup. He's not focused on, let alone concerned about policy. It's about branding. He hijacks the Kennedy Center and its board of directors, then has himself named as the Kennedy Center board chair. And instead of focusing full attention on Ukraine or Venezuela, affordability of the life in the United States, he illegally changes the name of the Kennedy Center to the Trump Kennedy Center. He's not focused on, let alone concerned about policy. It's about branding. In Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises, the character Mike Campbell was asked by character Bill about his money troubles. How'd you go bankrupt? Bill asked. 2 ways, Mike said. gradually, and then suddenly. What brought it on? Bill asked. Friends, said Mike. I had a lot of friends, false friends. I had creditors too, probably more creditors than anybody in England. Well, I believe the same can be said about American representative democracy. What did Steve Bannon tell you in the Frontline March 17th, 2019 interview? Quote, you have right-wing populism, you have left-wing populism. Right-wing populism is about deconstruction of the administrative state. Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez, they're more about inclusion of the state. We're both populists, according to Bannon, but they want more state intervention. We want less. In fact, according to Bannon, we want to start to take apart certain parts of the apparatus. He warned you in 2019 what their agenda was. He continued. And so that whole thing is basically focused on the deconstruction of the administrative state, at the same time saying, hey, we're nationalists. This is about the nation. The nation's concerns have to come forward, end quote. But with all of this, we can't get distracted by Trump derangement syndrome. Remember, Trump beat the Democrats twice with pages from the same playbook. So as we point the finger at his malignant narcissism and his antisocial personality disorder, what does this say about the dying process if this sick SOB beat Hillary? Yeah, I know she won the popular vote, but lost the Electoral College, and he beat Kamala. And now he's beating the Democrats again with the healthcare subsidy issue. And the Republicans are offering absolutely nothing. And as we stand here today, or sit here today, they're still winning on the issue. So for as sick and dangerous as this SOB is, just focusing on his derangement and ignoring what the Democrats can't seem to do, to me, is even more dangerous. All of this ties to our current issue in that, for as horrified as we all are about the 90 plus extrajudicial murders in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific Oceans, the House still shot down, no pun intended, a pair of Democratic-led resolutions Wednesday designed to curtail Trump's strikes on suspected drug boats in the Caribbean and the administration's so-called hostilities within or against Venezuela. The House has abdicated its responsibility. They are not providing checks and balances on the executive branch. American democracy is failing. Final point on this. Dr. Walters told us in White Nationalism, Black Interests, most policy actions appear to take on an objective quality where policymakers, such as Bannon, argue they are acting on the basis of national interests. That's Bannon's argument, the disguise of nationalism. On today's episode, the issue before us is, quote, the truth has never been revealed, Maduro said. These recent U.S. actions and statements serve to demonstrate that the U.S. narrative attempting to establish that the U.S. military presence in the Caribbean Sea aimed to combat drug cartels or the Tren de Aragua gang has completely unraveled. Quote, they are attempting a regime change in Venezuela to impose a puppet government that wouldn't last 47 hours, a government that would hand over the Constitution, sovereignty, and all the wealth and turn Venezuela into a colony, end quote. What does all of this mean? Let's talk with my guest. He's the current president of the Tucson Education Association, which is the local educators union, and a member of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, Jim Byrne. Jim, welcome to the show.
Dr. Leon, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
So, and again, I appreciate your indulgence of my of my diatribe. Thank you for indulging me during that piece. So let's start with this. How does the current president of the Tucson Education Association and a member of the Freedom Realm Socialist Organization get to Venezuela in defense or support of the Bolivarian Revolution?
Well, part of it starts personally with me in terms of my personal interest in what President Chavez has started more than 25 years ago. As somebody who really started to get into understanding Latin American politics in my undergrad studies, having studied the Sandinista Revolution and seen one kind of like unfurling a little bit differently in Venezuela. And then I spent 6 months there in 2010, just wanting to be around the presence inside of a country trying to pull off these things. I wasn't in a little bit more of the political hotbed areas, but I got to see the revolution from the far eastern side of the country and hear of its impact on people's daily lives and things like that. And so then I sort of stayed on the path of doing what I think any person of conscience and has progressive and left politics, which is to understand that, you know, the role of the United States government and our ruling class through our imperialist structures, both financial, economic, political, cultural, and certainly militarily, it is our duty to do everything we can to make sure that our government and our corporations don't interfere in the lives of others, that every nation has the right to self-determination. And so what that looks like is sometimes getting the opportunity to go to places because you help organize and try and create mass movements to stop U.S. imperialism and U.S. intervention in various parts of the world, but this one specifically with Venezuela. And this one, this opportunity to be an international delegate was because this was a working class Congress and had international invitations to folks who are, doing their work and are representing their unions. And so that was all this kind of folded together, and it was really special because there was also teachers both from Venezuela and internationally who were there, and we got to talk our education issues as well as the sort of the bigger geopolitical ones.
At kind of the 30,000 foot level, based upon your research and your study and your experience in Venezuela, the Bolivarian Revolution, democratic socialism, the United States really has heartburn, really can't seem to understand that whether it's Venezuela, whether it's Colombia, whether it's Nicaragua, that these folks are acting and speaking in their interests for themselves, for their countries. How do you see this manifesting itself on the ground in the time that you've spent in Venezuela? Hopefully that question makes sense.
Yeah, it's been incredible to see what a popular mass movement with a tremendous diversity of political thought and representation over the last 25 years has been able to deliver, even sort of especially in the face of U.S. sanctions, coup attempts, different forms of interventions, oppositional violence, oppositional electoral fraud, stealing votes, etc. And there's number one, that they still exist, and number two, that they've made all the achievements that they've had, regardless of the United States getting Saudi Arabia to drop the price of oil in 2014 to try and sort of really just break the economy and disrupt the social and educational programs that have been the hallmark and the cornerstone of the Bolivarian Revolution. And then, just all these other things so number one, that they exist. Number two, that they've achieved so much. And then three, in this moment of the last almost 4 months now, 26 plus weeks, that the PSUV, the ruling party that's represented by President Maduro, that has millions of members around the country, their decisions to change their structure, include more vice presidents, the growing militia movements. And so the buzzword of yesterday, the Congress this week, the past few days in Venezuela, especially from the Venezuelan side, us internationalists were fully in support, of course. But it was the deepening, or the deepening of the revolution by providing more power structures to get sort of power from the top to the grassroots, to the base level, to the barrios, to the street corners, etc., into the workplaces. And in the face of the United States, 25% of the United States naval forces right on, pretty darn close, to certainly enough to pose a threat, to open up your power structures, to democratize, to deepen the participation and engagement of people, while threats are right there. And some of them might be internal from the opposition, or anybody who might take a traitorous deal that the United States sort of wags over the top of them. And then certainly the external threat of the United States. To be able to do that is truly remarkable, and just tons of respect and admiration for the Venezuelan people, the political parties, the social organizations, the trade unions, and the top elected leadership, to be able to, in the face of all these threats, to prepare yourselves militarily, but also politically and socially, to make sure that you're as organized as possible.
I hope this question doesn't come across as sophomoric. How committed are the Venezuelan people to the Bolivarian Revolution? And here's why I asked that question. We've heard ad nauseum that Nicolas Maduro is an authoritarian. Nicolas Maduro is a dictator. Nicolas Maduro is everything but a child of God. The Western narrative, and not only have they done this with Maduro, but they do it with Xi in China. They do it with Putin in Russia. They do it in Iran. They vilify the leader. They make the leader appear to be the enemy. But I've said on this show a number of times that if Maduro, that in Venezuela, from the Venezuelans' perspective, it's not about Maduro. It's about the revolution. And if Maduro did not typify, exemplify the precepts of the revolution, of the Chavista revolution, the United States wouldn't have to overthrow him. The Venezuelans would do it themselves. So in real terms, in terms of the militia, in terms of other elements, how committed are the Venezuelans to this revolution?
I think you can see it in the election results, in the face of all the fraud and attempts at interventions and violence at ballots across the last couple of decades, and most recently in the summer of 2024. There's still the turnout at the presidential level. There's votes for citywide candidates, governors. The PSUV is a tremendously popular party, and it is the tip of the spear in the Bolivarian Revolution. It was a great idea from the architects of this to bring together as many like-minded political parties under one big umbrella and have 7 guiding principles about how to have popular power, how to redesign the armed forces and build this civic, military, political union across the country, and what that means. And you can see it in the rise of people participating. There's numbers that the popular militias, which aren't necessarily always just like how we think of them in the United States as militias, they were initially designed to really help carry out the food distribution programs when the sanctions and that price of oil dropped 10 plus years ago. And there was price gouging and hoarding and lots of movements from the comprador class, the opposition, the economic elites of Venezuela in league with U.S. imperialism to try and disrupt the economy as much as possible. And so those militias were a little bit more like they're kind of like a mix of neighborhood watch, food distribution, checking in to make sure that there's that things are happening. It's another popular form of participation and engagement by the masses. And so what we've heard is those numbers have doubled. There were some great social media reels a few months ago about people training as the United States had really engaged and Donald Trump had started his threats in the boat strikes on the fishing boats. And so you see just a popularity there. The youth that turned out, trying to go back through my timeline to remember exactly when some of these happened, but these were probably 3-4 weeks ago. They had a youth communal council, and there was a big march, and the president's right in the middle of all these young people. And so he's bold. The people love him. And so all these things are really, they're gelling. You see it by the numbers of people turning out, the enthusiasm that they have. Of course, they love and support their president. But I think your point is also valid, that it's the power's in their hands. They know it. There's been a tremendous ideological shift. They know their constitution well. Something that President Chavez was able to get out, the little blue book of the Constitution that the people helped write themselves, which is one of the most progressive constitutions on the planet. And so they could take this thing on. And I think that's the point of the actions over the last several weeks, is to make sure that the revolution defends itself and lives on. And a lot of the other words in terms of the deepening of the revolution was like, if we want independence from what Trump is doing right now, but if it doesn't go to full liberation and head towards socialism, then this stuff's kind of meaningless, is just sort of to finish the thought there. And so it is really about popular power. It's about worker power. It's about social movement power and high levels of organization, so that people can meet the needs of whether that's defense, food distribution, getting projects done, like things rebuilt, water projects built, all sorts of things. It's very dynamic and transformational.
Were you in the country when Trump made the statement about the United States taking its oil? Were you there when he made that statement?
If it was this week, then yes. Things have been flying. Where he was like, all the sanctioned oil, that's what we're taking it. I
wonder how that played on the ground, because what I'm trying to drill down to is to get a better sense of what's happening on the ground. And you're being very clear, and thank you for providing that. Because you just came back, I'm really trying to get a sense of how the Venezuelans are responding to this. What is the United States, if Trump follows through on this, what the United States is actually getting ready to walk into? I think they're getting ready to walk into a buzzsaw. What was the reaction when Trump talked about, we're going to take our oil, as though he's James Monroe? I mean, as though the Monroe Doctrine is still in play.
Yeah, there was, there's defiance. And I think, what impresses me is in the face of all these things, the Venezuelans that I've met and I've seen in these larger gatherings, whether that was in 2020 or this year, for me personally, is they've got a tremendous amount of warmth, camaraderie, and a great sense of humor. And so I think this is a little bit like water off the duck's back. Of course he would say this. Of course he would say that. And what I think the resiliency and the ability to overcome with solutions that this revolution, from the individual level to, sort of the structural power and economic and political that the Bolivarian Revolution is able to provide, it just seems like, oh, this is okay. Here's the next thing. And so there wasn't a big, oh gosh, our days are numbered. We're toast. Pack your bags. We should all just try and get out of here, or accept our fate that, Machado and the opposition are going to come in and just neoliberalize us again and privatize all that we've nationalized and made public. And so there's, I think it wasn't explicitly stated, but their expression of solidarity with each other and confidence in their president. At the Workers' Congress, they presented a number of proposals directly to the president, the first time that that's ever happened, that they've had a trade union assembly, an assembly of the working class, that the presidents come to meet with them and they deliver them in the manner that they did. And so I think it's just a profound confidence in themselves and their ability to organize to overcome whatever it is that U.S. imperialism is trying to put upon them.
You mentioned Machado, and I'll use the term, and the affiliated gangsters are going to come in. In talking to Tulio Vergez, he made the point that if the American intervention were to occur, and if they were able to remove Maduro, and we'll just put it that way, that the United States would then be facing a serious problem because of the Venezuelan Constitution, and that what the United States would actually be doing is taking a mythical dictator and replacing the mythical dictator with a real dictator, because Machado would have to operate as a dictator. Your thoughts?
Yeah, exactly. She wouldn't be. It would be a true coup in the sense that it's illegal. It's against the rules and governing constitution of, in this case, of course, Venezuela. And yeah, I mean the irony and the lies, the duplicitousness that's just been spewed out of the opposition and Trump and Rubio and Hegseth. I think a lot more people in the United States are seeing through that stuff. But yeah, I mean, it would, and I see it in headlines as well, in terms of, and they're not across, they're across the political spectrum, that this would not be easy if Maduro falls. Whether or not like the U.S. moves troops in, they'd have like an Afghanistan, Vietnam on their hands. If they just try to, do a decapitation in getting rid of Maduro, and then they try and let the opposition run, like, watch out. I think the buzzsaw metaphor is exactly what it would be, because the people would feel that this is 100% a dictatorship that is being put on by a foreign power, somebody who's been trying to destroy their country for the last 25 years. And the ability of the revolution to respond to things is tremendous, and the popularity of the revolution would go through the roof if somebody like Machado was installed, and it just wouldn't last long. And I think chaos is another term I see often on headlines when describing sort of the transition from Maduro to a Machado or something like that. It would just be a mess, and I think it would be you're rattling the bee's nest, and I think the outcome of that would not be one in which the United States would feel victorious.
As Madhu says, we must use the accurate terms. If the Bolivarian revolutionary government is overthrown by the USA, the bourgeois would take control and install a dictator of the bourgeois. I'm not quite sure what I've said that isn't accurate, as Madhu. So if you could let me know where I'm misrepresenting the reality, I'd appreciate it. Jim, you have on your shirt what appears to be a Palestinian flag-based logo. If you could draw some comparisons or contrasts between the genocide in Gaza with the settler colonial state trying to exterminate the Palestinians, and what's transpiring in Venezuela.
Yeah, this is I'm an organizer with our Tucson Anti-War Committee. This is our logo, and people have asked that a lot, and it's been something because what happened after October 7th 2 years ago just exploded a solidarity movement in this country that the likes of which we've never seen for Palestine. And so like when Venezuela popped up, a lot of the Palestine solidarity activists who kind of like cut their teeth organizing and mobilizing. I don't think there was we don't know what to make of this, because we've heard the rhetoric that you described earlier about Maduro and what's going on there and things like that. So it was helpful for us to like pause and share some history. We did a teach-in here in Tucson to describe what's going on in Venezuela and a little bit of the history, and people found that tremendously helpful. And there's an occupation being threatened really by the United States, where there's an actual occupation that's been happening for 75 plus years in Palestine at the hands of Israel. I think the viciousness is certainly a characteristic of it. There are also clear ties as to Israel's role in helping the United States in Venezuela try to help accomplish U.S. imperialism's goals. There's intelligence intelligence agents that have tried to support Machado and feed the United States information, and those have Israeli connections, down to the F-35s that fly over and bomb, kill, and most recently in the West Bank a couple of weeks ago, that Israel uses, buys from Lockheed Martin. Those F-35s have flown across Venezuela and very close, violating airspace. So there's the occupation, there's the strangling, there's the rhetoric that goes into the media propaganda about these things. There's the geopolitical importance of these strategic places and resources. Granted, Palestine doesn't have oil, and certainly in the way that Venezuela has the largest oil reserves on the on Earth. But who's Palestine right next to? Syria, Iraq, Iran, the Straits of Hormuz, and a vital.
There is oil and natural gas off the coast of the Mediterranean.
That's right.
So Palestine, and that's in Palestinian territorial water. So they don't have the vast resources, but it's there.
Absolutely. And I think Trump makes those things clearer, where like perhaps the Democrats talk more about human rights and things like that. The gloves come off with Trump, and he's just that much more bold-faced with what they're looking for. Elon Musk talking about Bolivia's lithium and things like that. We'll go get it, that kind of stuff. That is just kind of ripping off the nice face of U.S. imperialism that the Democrats usually utilize and weaponize against us to neutralize our efforts to see what they're doing. So it's been really helpful to talk about these two, the Palestine and Venezuela, and the kind of solidarity that's there. It's also helpful to talk about the role that the Bolivarian Revolution, led by Comandante Chavez when he was alive, in calling out Israel and calling out the connections that's going on there, and breaking political ties and kicking out the ambassadors out of this country, and just saying things that were not being said, certainly on an international level outside of Palestine in the early 2000s. And so kind of making sure that people know that stuff actually happened, because those things either don't see the light of day in the corporate press here in the United States, or they're short sound bites and snippets, and then they're off and calling him a strong man, fiery, authoritarian, or whatever. So it's taking the time to kind of unpack that history and the reality, and show some very clear connections, and people are like, oh yeah, aha. And so we've seen our rallies. They're not, hundreds and hundreds for Venezuela here yet, if need be. But they've definitely increased in size, and because we took the time to do some education about it.
And as Madhu says, you didn't say anything incorrect. I wanted to help us all use the accurate terminology as a student of scientific socialism. Well, as Madhu, thank you very much. That's why we have this program. Final point on this correlation or connection between the genocide in Gaza and what's happening in Venezuela. It was ironic, if not pathetic, that Machado calls Netanyahu and thanks him for his support. You just acknowledged, I think, agreement with that. I'll let you pick it up from there. I don't have to elaborate. Go ahead and run with it, Jim.
There's another one. I missed that one. There's a lot. So thank you for bringing up Machado as well. Our local anti-war committee is connected with the Anti-War Action Network, which is a national organization of over 20 cities who have either Palestine solidarity or sort of generally anti-war, anti-U.S. intervention organizing. And we put out a statement when the so-called Nobel Peace Prize was given to Machado. And in order to do what you asked was like, how do we draw some connections here between Palestine and Venezuela so that very strong Palestine solidarity movement in the United States can see the connections and we can kind of raise the level of consciousness and organization to build our mass movements bigger. And that's Machado was like applauding the genocide in Gaza, applauding Netanyahu, asking for Israel and the United States to help create the opportunity through a violent overthrow or otherwise for the opposition, the rich opposition in Venezuela to take over. So, I think she sealed her fate with a lot of people when she made that public comment.
And Unemployed Scholar, thank you very much for that $1.99 super sticker. Thank you very much. Greatly appreciate that contribution. So I had said maybe 10 days ago when the whole conversation about the United States invading Venezuela, I said this to a number of folks. I said this to Ricardo Vaz at Venezuelan Analysis. I think I had a conversation with Tulio Vergez about this. I said that Trump was bluffing, and that as I was speaking at that time, I said he's not that stupid to go into Venezuela, and a number of folks agreed with me. And now you see President Maduro not only rhetorically challenging Trump, not capitulating to Trump's demands, but now he's ordered Venezuelan naval ships to escort Venezuelan tankers. So this sounds to me as though President Maduro is all in and saying to Donald Trump, if you're going to do this, if you want to be froggy, then jump. Jim, your thoughts?
Yeah, it was really powerful to hear President Maduro say that and mean it. And I think, as we see the escalations and the kind of the saber rattling from Trump, I think these are symptoms of U.S. imperialism in steady decline. They're not able to accomplish their agenda in the old ways. In the various parts of the world, and so they're trying something. Trump turned his eye towards Latin America in his first administration, and none of his ideas were popular, and he failed at every single intervention attempt, especially in Venezuela. And so this time they're using a different approach and a far more aggressive. Obviously, the body counts over 90. Blood on the hands of Rubio, Hegseth, and Trump as truly monsters, murderous monsters. And so what they call brinksmanship, so taking things to Trump bringing in the Gerald Ford, and there's 15,000 military personnel and flying to Super Hornets deep into the Gulf of Venezuela, violating airspace. They're part of it is it's testing, right? He's trying to he is bluffing in a way to see who blinks first. Mm-hmm. And it's not going to be Maduro, and it's not going to be the Venezuelans. And instead they're going to be like, no, we're actually going to protect our ships. And, I know that's speaking from internal confidence about themselves, but also that they've got the support of fellow Latin American and Caribbean nations, as well as China, Russia, and Iran, in terms of hey, you start messing with oil in this way, you start messing with how these things go, you're talking about global economic impact. And I think nobody else in Latin America that we've seen has sort of flinched and been jumping to the side to rally on the side of Trump. So I think there's regional and international solidarity, but then there's just that internal strength that Maduro and the Bolivarian Revolution have to say, like, well, you can do that if you want, but we're going to escort our tankers as far as we need to.
And Michaelo Malik, thank you for that $20 super sticker. Greatly appreciate that support. I want to have you elaborate a little bit on the point that you just made, because as you were speaking, I was writing down Ortega in Nicaragua, Petro in Colombia, and you also just mentioned Russia and China. And in terms of support for Venezuela, and I think it's important for people looking at this objectively to appreciate that support can come in a number of different ways. So, for example, and again, in talking to Tulio, he was pointing out to me that Russia has been on the ground. At Bobby Joan, thank you for that $5 soup. Thank you very much. That Tulio was making the point, and I didn't realize this until he made the point, that Russia has been there training Venezuelan forces, and Tulio even mentioned the word hypersonic technology. So a lot of folks may not realize that the Gerald Ford could very well be in peril, much to the dismay of the Department of Defense. But in another point, China would probably not send in military force. Their support would be economic support. Then you've got, of course, Petro in Colombia. You've got Ortega in Nicaragua. So talk about some of those dynamics. And again, all support doesn't necessarily have to be military support.
Correct. And you know, that balance of what it is, economic, that China can really bring is as important, because those sanctions are still hitting, and they prevent a lot of opportunities for the kind of development that Venezuela could really do if their nationalized oil was able to reach the kind of markets that it could and should, if the United States wasn't playing like an extortionist modern siege over the last decade or so. So yeah, I think what also I've seen is military articles that are talking about, you know, they might not have, that Venezuela might not have the kind, certainly doesn't have the kind of aircraft and other surface to air missiles and things like that the United States have. And we spend billions each year, nearly $1 trillion each year on our defense budget. But what they do have are a lot of these smaller Russian vehicles that can move, that are highly mobile and can hit, you know, aircraft and missiles from the ground. And so it's not as easy. I think people probably assume that the United States is the superpower and Venezuela probably doesn't have this kind of military. But having the support of Russia over the last 20 years or so in terms of military support, buying supplies, weapons, missiles, training, etc., sharing intelligence and things like that, that's, you know, they've obviously, as you can see in the Ukraine, they're not an easy pushover. And so that's tremendous to know in terms of just like that protection that the Venezuelan military with Russian support would be able to do. And then China also can flex. And this is another layer to the Venezuelan issue right now, which is the Southern Command General, Holden, who's on his way out. He presented a paper, their strategic paper, an interest paper in February of this year. The first country listed as a threat is China. And then China is just peppered all throughout that document, which was then presented to Congress in April. And so this is that change of tactics where Obama's pivot to Asia certainly was conducting cyber warfare against North Korea and China, and they moved 2,000 Marines into Australia. You know, the things they were doing in the Philippines are all strategic moves right there in China. The agreements that Trump's trying to move now in South Korea, you know, obviously we still maintain 30,000 troops and nuclear weapons aimed at North Korea. But we also know the bigger play on the chessboard is China there. So here in this hemisphere, where the United States can't really get to Asia and push back because China's development has been an industry-centered industrial growth centered actual economic production versus the financial growth that only sees, fictitious capital and profits fly to Wall Street, and some of the tech companies and some of the mining companies. The Chinese layer here is that the United States is trying to make an effort to try and get rid of China in a grander scheme, but it still wants. I mean, it's had Venezuela on its radar for the past 20 years. The coup attempt in 2002, the oil lockout and strike in 2002, and the various interventions. They've wanted to get rid of Venezuela on its own. But now that China's grown so much, and you've got over 20 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean who are members of the Belt and Road Initiative, and China is either their number one or number two trade partner, and they're investing in roads and infrastructure and ports and building railroad tracks and things like that. They're making actual investment that grows the economic development of countries. The United States just can't compete with that. And so this is an added layer. And so China could and is probably, even without doing anything, just flexing its economic muscle to be like, we've got these pretty fair trade and mutual trade agreements that these countries don't want to see us back out of, because all the United States wants to bring in are multinational corporations who just want to extract our resources and get out of there and probably force us into financial loans that don't benefit us. They benefit Wall Street. So in that way, that's how I see China also playing an economic impact.
Chance Wilson. Oh, thank you very much, Chance, for that $20 super sticker. Greatly appreciate that. As Madhu says, the Gerald Ford is a sitting duck. Yemen defeated the U.S. Navy in the Red Sea, so nobody is fooled by this bluster. I think that's an excellent point that often gets overlooked. Again, I haven't heard Rachel Maddow make that point. I haven't heard Gwen, whatever her name is, Jen Psaki make that point. As Madhu, that's a great point. And again, Chance, thank you. Greatly appreciate that. And to elaborate on that a little further out, when we mention Russia and mention China, I think what people lose sight of is they are anti-imperialist. That's what I believe is really at the center of their response, or the friction between them and the United States is imperialism versus anti-imperialism. Your thoughts, Jim?
Yeah, I think especially, I think more objectively than anything, I think China's political stance is certainly one that would convey a more sort of theoretical anti-imperialism. But just that pursuit of the multipolar world in which, DC and Wall Street aren't the pushing away from the Washington consensus as it was known, and globalization through that lens, that they're done. And I think those are really important pieces to understand, that that push towards a multipolar world the United States just can't compete with anymore. And so there are some sort of objectively anti-imperialist pieces when we talk about those different countries, is they're trying to break away from the Western chains of domination economically, financially, politically, and militarily, all those aspects. And so I think when they are able to make deals, and even like when the ability of, we can see sort of the sanctions playbook fly in the face, and it has the opposite impact, really, like when the United States hit Russia with sanctions in the early and mid 2000s. Their ability to overcome that, they're like, oh, okay, we'll change markets. Okay, we'll start growing more food. Okay, we'll start doing this. The same has played out in Venezuela in terms of they were over reliant and highly dependent on food imports and things like that, and they flipped that, and they're working against those imperial entanglements to try and get as much self-sufficiency as possible economically. And so having those trade agreements and opportunities to just say, F you to the United States. We're gonna move this oil. We're gonna sell these things. We're gonna contract with Iran to try and get oil parts so our industries can refine and we can sell things here. We can move food. We can get this and we can do all that stuff. Those partnerships between Russia, China, Iran, and a handful of other countries that Venezuela has do form, that multipolar bloc. That is so vital in that transformation of the world, and the United States is really just lashing out at it at this point.
Chip Chapman says, well, Israel and the U.S. bombed the hell out of Yemen, so that's the reason why you haven't heard from the Houthis lately. Chip, you might want to do some more reading because that's just a ridiculous statement. The Houthis beat the Saudis, and we're about to sign a peace agreement with the Saudis, and the United States went in and threatened the Saudis. If they did that, the U.S. would respond. The Ansar Allah ran the U.S. out of the Red Sea and is still in control of traffic. Chip, come on now. You should know when you come to this program, you need to do a little more homework and stop with just the U.S. talking points and the chatter, because that's just foolish. Jim, to your point, what I think we're really seeing here, and the West doesn't want to admit it, a lot of the conflict that the West now finds itself engaged in is a result of its own sanction regime. And that the sanctions have forced alliances and relationships that either weren't in existence to the level that they have developed, or maybe weren't there at all. But what they say, hard times make a monkey eat snowballs. And folks have decided we now have to operate outside the dollar. We now have to operate as a unit against the hegemon, because the hegemon is not operating in our interest. And also that economically the grass is now proving to be greener on the other side. The other point was technology. The development of technologies has now who would have thought that the Houthis would have hypersonic missiles? Go ahead.
Yeah, it is really incredible to see that level of coordination and cooperation, and it's driven by necessity, as you said, but then just bold enough to do it and not fall in line anymore. And that takes political leadership and strength, but also some base at home. In the case of China, a giant communist party and its successful revolution, to support what a party and an elected leadership say and do on the world scale. And so they're able to make a lot of deals. And I think then it's that much more clear in the case of like Russia, Ukraine. And you never want to see the kind of loss of life that's been exchanged there, but Russia's economically a little bit more self-reliant and shifted in other ways. And Russia, Russia's are not going to be allowed to sell natural gas and oil to Europe anymore. Guess what? There's plenty of markets elsewhere, China, India, etc. We'll move our stuff there, and they're happy to engage with us. They're not cowing to Washington anymore. So there's one aspect that we can grow on our own. And then on the other side, then they look and see what kind of deal the Ukrainians got out of this. And this was really tough to do in February 2022 when Russia did invade, is to pull back and see that bigger picture and be like, look at what the United States is doing, what they're blocking, and what they've been building towards at home, which is that liquefied natural gas, trying to keep Europe tied to the United States as much as possible economically. So now, Ukraine has now been forced to create all these deals for natural gas and oil and other arrangements that these are privatized contracts going to the U.S. bidders in terms of the corporate oligarchs who want to control this on their own. So on one hand, hey, go with the folks who are proven winners, because on the other side, the United States is just going to come and take your stuff again.
Well, and you know, you look at the soy issue that Trump imposed tariffs on China. China said, we'll buy our soybeans from Brazil, and to hell with the American soy farmer. We don't need them. And now Trump has gone crawling back. I think China just announced its GDP for the year, or no, I'm sorry, their trade surplus. Their trade surplus for the year has reached historic levels because they went out and established other markets in order to offset the pressure that the United States was trying to impose. I seem to recall a guy by the name of President, what was his name? Oh, Joe Biden talked about turning the ruble into rubble. How's that working out for you, Joe? Not too well. India's buying Russian oil, saying to the United States, we'll get our oil where we want our oil. So this has just the United States mythologies of manifest destiny and all this other foolishness, American global, what did George Bush call it? American internationalism and all this other foolishness has brought about a realignment of relationships. The fact that the United States is ignoring, we've moved from a unipolar to a multipolar world. The lie ain't gonna work anymore, Jim.
Yeah, I think that's what people are starting to see. And it was even at the level of like military coordination and then Israel's response to the axis of resistance in support and solidarity with Palestine. I think people in the United States got a little bit more of a geography lesson as to where Syria is, where Lebanon is, the history of Israel invading Lebanon, and the level of solidarity and outpouring that Iran got in the summer. I don't know if I'd ever seen that in my lifetime, that like people were coming out in the United States and hands off Iran because of what they were doing. And so I think you see those crumbling things as people see that there are these different worlds. There's way more knowledge about who the Houthis are, Ansar Allah, and what Yemen's doing, and just this awakening. And my comments the other day in Venezuela were to Venezuelan workers were that people in the United States are seeing the world with eyes open and seeing it more clearly than we have before. And I know sometimes we'll get caught in the spin cycle, but I think generally the trend is heading that way, and thankfully so.
And final point, because I think a corollary to what you've just said is you also have to understand how long it takes for change to take place. That particularly when you're in the echo chamber of Western media, it's analogous to turning an aircraft carrier. It takes time. So a lot of people listening to the comment you just made about the American public will say, well, why isn't anything happening? And the answer is, it is happening. It's right now, it's happening on much, much smaller scales than we would like to see, but it's happening. Who would have thought, let's say 10 years ago, that the divestiture boycott sanctions movement against the settler colonial state of Israel would have the traction that it has now? Nobody. Who would have thought that if somebody says you're anti-Semitic, that the response now will be, no, I'm not. You just don't understand the difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. You don't understand that. You can't scare me with that anymore. Who would have thought that 10 years ago, those realities would be what they are today? My point is, these things take time.
Absolutely. And to celebrate some organized wins, to your point, in Minnesota, they've been driving to get the state pension divested from Israel. And they won a significant victory a few weeks back on that. I think it was there's another one in Detroit, similar theme. Illinois just yesterday had a big action trying to drive the Illinois State Board divestment campaign and really make it loud that they want those funds divested there as well. So we're putting these things together in terms of that. The BDS movement, as you mentioned, from 10 years ago, mix it a little bit more with the broader masses who got on board with Palestine solidarity. And now we're trying to find more concrete ways to really grind up the gears of the imperialist war machine and the Zionist funding that goes over there to support their genocide and illegal occupation.
Jim Byrne, thank you very, very much for your time today. Greatly, greatly, greatly appreciate that analysis. I'm going to have to talk to you offline. I got to get a couple of those Tucson anti-war committee shirts. I got to figure out how to get my hands on a couple of them. We'll talk about that offline. But hey, man, really, really appreciate your time today. Have a wonderful, wonderful holiday, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.
You as well. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, man. Thank you. Thank you. All right, folks. I got to thank Jim Byrne for joining me today. Thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. New episode and final episode on Monday. We're going to wrap this show up, at least for this phase of it, the way we started it, with my dear, dear friend and brother, Tom Porter. He's going to join us on Monday for the final show. We haven't been able to develop this to the point where it is able to sustain itself, and with all of the love and support and financial backing we've received from you all, we still have not been able to have this thing break even. And to put it very clearly and very, very bluntly, I've run out of money. So this has been where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter. And we have not chattered here on Connecting the Dots. So see y'all Monday. That'll be the last one. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a blessed remainder of your day and a wonderful weekend. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.